Welcome to MamaFuel, the podcast that fuels every mama's heart, soul, mind, and body, and hopefully sparks a few dreams along the way. I'm Ann Ferguson, Chief Nurturer and Mama Mentor at the Centered Mama Project, and your host for this podcast. I'll be sharing real, raw, and often funny conversations with beautiful mamas from around the world to remind you that you're not alone and that you're doing amazingly on this wild journey of shepherding small humans as they make their way on our beautiful planet. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. This is Ann Ferguson, your host. And before we start this week's episode, I wanted to talk about two things. One is that you may have heard me mentioning before the MamaFuel Sisterhood, which is a beautiful, sacred membership in which a gorgeous collection of mamas have been gathered since October. And in that membership, we talk all things heart, soul, mind, body, basically anything and everything goes within that safe, accepting, loving space. And it is a space that has been deliciously small since October, and it's time to expand that circle. It's time to open our hearts and open our minds to welcome in even more mamas from around the world. We span the globe at this point, and I would love to fill in some empty spaces in the circle in the sense that as we step wider to broaden the circle, there will be space for you and your beautiful heart. And I would love to welcome you. If this is something that speaks to you, keep your eyes and ears peeled. May 7th is the date that all the fun will get started. So I am excited to tell you more about the sisterhood at that time. And if you just can't wait and you want more information, then as a listener to MamaFuel, the podcast, you are more than welcome to email me at Anne, A-N-N-E, at MamaFuel, MAMAFUEL.me, and I will write back to you with all of the information that you would need to know about the sisterhood to see if it is the right place for you to come and lay your heart and mind and eyes and entire self open and receive all of the love that's waiting there for you. So again, MamaFuel, the sisterhood, is opening its doors again in May, and I will start telling you all about it as of the 7th of May. Second thing I wanted to talk about before we get into the beautiful conversation I enjoyed today with our guest, Sarah Sproule, is that this is a conversation that you may want to pop some earphones in to listen to and or not listen to it while your kids are around, because Sarah's passion and mission in life is to help parents have supportive, loving, and connective conversations with their kids around the sometimes challenging topic of sex. And that goes with teeny tiny kids all the way up to the big ones who are going to start having it any minute if they aren't already. So it may be something that you want to just listen to on your own. We are very frank about different body parts and different aspects of sexuality. So I wanted to just give you a heads up, depending on how you have a tendency to listen to MamaFuel. Without any further ado, I'm really excited to share this conversation because there's definite food for thought, certainly for me, and the conversations I have already been having and will continue to have with my girls. And I know that with your beautiful open heart and mind, there will also be nuggets in here for you. So enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. I am Ann Ferguson, your host, and I'm super happy to invite you along to what is essentially a first conversation between me and today's guest, Sarah Sproule. We spoke very briefly before this conversation just to hear each other's voices, but this is our first real conversation, and we have so many things to talk about. Sarah and I met through a common business group that we are in. We both have membership sites, the MamaFuel Sisterhood, and Sarah also has a membership, and got to know each other a little bit there. And I realized that she has a life experience and a passion that are so relevant to every single one of us, no matter how old our kids are. And I really wanted to bring her in, partially because I'm interested at this time in season of my parenting journey to have this conversation, because the talk that we need to have with our kids is ongoing. And partially because I know that so many of you listening are on some phase of your listening journey. And unless your kids are, gone from the house, the talk is something that is going to be happening in your house if it hasn't already. So if you haven't figured it out already, today's guest, Sarah, is really passionate about making sure that parents can have conversations with their kids about sex in a way that doesn't feel threatening and doesn't feel judgmental and does feel loving and connecting. So if you have little ears around you today, this might be an episode that you want to listen to on your own or to pop headphones in. I'm not sure how graphic we'll get, but I'm pretty up for having talks about all the things. So you might not want your 3-year-old asking, what does masturbation mean? So if you haven't already, you might want to put some headphones in. So without any further ado, let's get started. Sarah, first of all, thank you. Thank you for joining me.
You're so welcome. I'm so happy to be here.
So fun. So I'm in Switzerland. Sarah, you're in Ireland. We've never met. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, you can see Sarah and I are both sporting giant black glasses. And if you aren't on YouTube, then you should get over there, or at the very least, look at the picture for this episode, because you'll see Sarah's amazing glasses. She has a collection. They're fabulous. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about your journey into motherhood. It's a place that I like to start just to kind of get some background on you.
Yeah, I came to motherhood kicking and screaming, actually, because my identity was very much tied up in my work. I'm an occupational therapist and came to occupational therapy as a mature age student, had sort of struggled through the end of my secondary schooling. So to be able to get my degree and have a professional qualification was a massive, massive thing for me. And it just made me feel like a complete person. Mm. And the idea of mothering was just not what I was interested in doing, really. I couldn't see why I would want to do it. And I had been in and out of long-term relationships for most of my 20s and just was not interested in mothering whatsoever. Found someone I loved to bits. We got married and we got pregnant with a sort of an unplanned pregnancy, who is now our eldest child, and she is very much loved. But it was absolutely, when I sort of looked at that pregnancy test, I was on the Champs-Élysées with my lovely girl pal. We'd had a girls' weekend. My husband was off skiing with his friends, and I was just absolutely devastated, to be quite honest. Mm. And it took me a good few months to sort of come around to this idea that we were doing this and my life was going to change.
It's refreshing to hear that, because so many women feel the pressure to have this nursery decorating, fluffy cloud, pink bunnies and blue baskets kind of experience of pregnancy, of finding out that you're pregnant. And the reality is that just isn't what happens for everyone. And it's funny, you mentioned the Champs-Élysées. I took my pregnancy test to Paris to give to my then partner, not yet husband, to announce to him, surprise! Mm-hmm. So yeah, how funny that we have that somehow a shared connection with Paris, although our experiences were vastly different. But so you obviously found that the mothering gig was maybe different than when you had expected, since you went on to have 2 more kids, because your kids are 11, 13, and 15 now, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was sort of like, well, we're doing this, we've done it, so we may as well just keep on doing it. And I can't say that having babies was easy for me. It wasn't easy. I was a tired, unhappy pregnant person for all those pregnancies, really, and found it difficult with newborn babies. I had a complex time establishing my breastfeeding. Once it was established, it usually would take, for all of them, it took about 3 weeks. Expressing, complex, but it was a priority for me. So I did that. Once it was established, we rocked on. But I'm an introvert, and I was never very interested in going to mummy and baby groups. So I spent my maternity leave, because in Ireland you get about 5 months, 4 or 5 months maternity leave, reading as many of the Harry Potters that J.K. Rowling had written at that time. That was 2003. Just very I went into my cave really with my baby, and we would do solo walks, sleeps on the couch. And I actually remember it as being lovely, wonderful time. And I enjoyed the babies, but not like, some mums, they just adore the baby stage. I didn't so much enjoy the baby stage. I now realize that my sweet spot in my parenting is actually parenting teens. And I just love that. I feel like it uses all my skills as a therapist and as a listener, and it helps, it engages my brain on a level that the toddler, small people stage just did not do, and I did not thrive during that time at all. But look, we're all different, aren't we?
So true. And in fact, when we spoke before having this conversation today, we were talking about how I felt that I was absolutely rocking the motherhood thing until Carolina reached 4, which is a relatively small proportion of her life.
Yeah.
We're now approaching the it'll only have been a third of her life. That part, I thought, oh my God, I was so patient. I was pretty sure I was the next in line after Mother Teresa for, bringing goodness to the world. And then 4 hit and, onward. And it has been such a journey of discovery and realization of, unhealed stuff from those ages. And every one of your, every time your kids hit a certain age, it's such an opportunity for you to heal stuff, whether you want to or not. Other people call it triggers and being annoying. But really it's just holding up a mirror, right? Like, this is what's going on for me. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not really just even what the age they get to. It's almost like they're different personalities and the ages they get to. Because I have one of my kids, he's amazing. There is something about him, though, that is just constantly challenging. And he has been like that for me anyway, for, maybe the last 5 years, because he doesn't take anything at face value. He will push and he'll push and he'll question and he'll question. And it's just sort of like, wow, this is such a challenge.
One of my friends, Heather Dawson, who was an earlier guest on the podcast, if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen. She's had, I think it was a total of 15 miscarriages before, I think there were 7 miscarriages before having her first, 9 before having her first son, and then another, however many, 6 before having her second. And she said to me one day around that period, she said, there are terrible 2s, trying 3s, effing 4s. And I thought, no, but yes. And she said to me, listen, no matter what else happens, our kids, those who question, those who don't take things at face value, are going to make phenomenal adults. They're not so easy to parent, but they will make phenomenal adults because these people are coming up to be super strong and to not just do as they're told. And it's inconvenient. Like, that's what we want in our small humans, just not with us. Like, I want you to be independent and to do your own thing and to not take things at face value with all those people. But for me, fall in line, child, fall in line. That's not what we really want, right?
No. But you know what? Like, you're right that it is a quality that is important. And in fact, for that child, he was recently diagnosed with a mild form of dyslexia. So in fact, it's almost like he will need that in his life to be able to negotiate a world that is not necessarily set up well for him.
No.
But he definitely has the skills to be able to manage that.
So good. Yeah, I can feel your trust in him, actually. I can feel that. And as the mama of someone who was one of my most recent guests, Carolina, my oldest daughter, she's we did a podcast recording together, and she talked a lot about her dyslexia. And her dyslexia is the word severe makes it sound awful. And it has been a very difficult experience for her. But her dyslexia is very, very deep and broad. And you're right, the world's not set up for kids, people, humans who think anything like not either I was going to say either ends of the norm, but I would say anywhere around the norm, above, below, to the right, to the left, in all directions.
Yeah.
It's just not. Yeah. Okay. So you have a fabulous, fancy-free, amazing life as a professional. You finally have achieved this holy grail. You see the pregnancy test. Oh my God. You figure it out. You find ways to take that precious time with your babies. And which actually reminds me of, there are some cultures where when a woman has a baby, she's allowed to spend, she spends 40 days in bed with her newborn. Like people bring food and you just spend 40 days in bed with your newborn to create that bond and get to know your baby and know yourself as a mother. And how beautiful is it that you did that for yourself, right?
Yeah.
I think that's
without even really realizing that was important. But I now look back and realize absolutely that it was. So it wouldn't have been a culturally supported thing. But
no,
it's lovely, isn't it? Sometimes when our bodies or our brains just make us do, it just has to be like that.
Yeah, it just is. So you just said two words that I think will be key to the conversation that we're going to have today, which is culturally supported. So you have your 3 kids, you continue to work as an occupational therapist, and then one day you realize that some of the conversations that you're having with your kids are a little bit different than the conversations that other people are having with their kids as pertains to sex and sexuality and human bodies and where babies come from. Tell me about the early realizations around that for you.
There's one moment that stands out for me, which makes me realize that people come to this in all different ways, these conversations about human sexuality. And John and I, our kids were something like 6, 4, and 2. And it was a Saturday morning. And I'm sure most of the people listening will remember those Saturday mornings when the kids have got up really early, but you as a parent, you're sort of flat out still on the bed going, oh, it's too early. Anyway, what we used to do is we would bring them all into our bedroom and close the door so they couldn't get out. And then we would lie in bed and just sort of groan there for a little while and think about our day. Well, on this particular day, John and I at that stage were using condoms as a form of birth control. And we had them in the bedside table drawer thing. And one of the kids was rummaging through, like small kids do, you know, they rummage through everything and they came across the condoms and we're taking them out. And my first reaction was, oh my God, kids and condoms, that's just gross. We need to do something about this. And I said, John, the kids have the condoms. And John said, now, this is a traditional Irish Catholic guy. And he said, what's wrong with that? And I was like, what is wrong with that? Maybe there actually isn't anything wrong with that. And the kids opened up the condoms and unrolled some and then took them into the ensuite and started to fill them up with water. And it just gave us another half an hour of relaxing in bed. It was actually super. But,
winning.
Yeah, right. What was interesting though was that my initial first reaction was, whereas John's was, which is opposite to what you imagine culturally, because John is Irish and has been brought up very sort of traditional Catholic Irish boy. Now, my background, my parents were missionaries too, so I have some of that sort of religious influence on how I was first parented around my sexuality, particularly as a teen. But after that, really, it became clear to me that, oh yeah, like these conversations can happen and they need to happen. I knew they did because I remember I have a very strong memory of, I was probably about 11 and I was in my bedroom. This was when we were living in Nigeria. So we didn't have a lot of media or anything like that. No, not hardly any TV, no radio. I remember Mum coming into my room with the little sly out of a tampon packet to come and talk to me about periods. And I was 11. I hadn't had my period yet. And she was coming in the door and she said something like, Sarah, I'd like to talk to you. And I was just like, no, get out. I don't want to have this talk. Get out. I don't want to talk to it. Really, really intensely, like just rah. And she was like, whoa, and backed out of the room. And we never had that conversation. And because it was so strong, such a strong memory for me, I thought, I never want that to happen between me and my kids. And so it was very much slowly have the conversations over time, which, as you alluded to, was not the way a lot of the parents here, I live in Dublin, a lot of the parents would be doing that. None of them really were doing that. And so I started to come up against this sort of clash of parenting ideology, perhaps you could call it, where I was having conversations with my kids and other people were not having those conversations. And so there was, conflict. I remember, do you want one more story?
Yes, please. Tell me about this kind of conflict, because I think it's something that we don't talk about it, and we don't necessarily realize that the broader implications of some of our choices that are completely private and personal to us and have nothing to do with anyone else suddenly get taken on board, judged, dissected, and then there's a ripple effect or a sort of ricochet that comes onto our kids and their friendships as a result of some of the conversations we choose to have. Yeah.
And that's what happened for us. I think our eldest was 10 and I was walking her home from school. We don't live very far away from the school, and she was walking with her pal. And they were walking just a bit ahead of me. And we live in, it's quite an urban place. So oftentimes you'll find rubbish on the ground. And as they're walking home from school, my daughter said, "Ooh, yuck." And her friend said, "What's yuck?" And she said, "Oh, there's a used condom on the ground." And sure enough, there was a used condom on the ground.
Which is yuck. She's right.
It is. It's gross, right?
Yeah.
And her friend said, "What's a condom?" And my daughter said, "Oh, that's the thing you use to stop the sperm getting to the egg," because that's what we had, the way we'd told it. Because that's
factually correct.
Yeah. And her friend went, "Oh, right." And we kept walking. The difficulty was that the friend's mum was walking a few paces in front on the phone and had heard this as I had heard it. And the following day came in to meet with John and I and to sort of say to us, she was angry. And, rightly so, in fairness, because our kid had told her kid what a condom was. And for her, she wasn't at that point where she wanted her child to have that information. She, as a parent, she didn't know that you could have conversations like that and how important it is to have conversations early like that. So she was very cross. And it ended up for the next year and a half, really, that Alice wasn't invited to their house and her child never seemed to be available to come to our house. And they had been very close up until that point. So it was a real learning experience for me that, we make these choices, but it has ramifications. And I suppose the other thing is that about 2 years after that happened, she rang me one day and said, "Do you know, I've been thinking," because she had a child 4 years, another 4 years younger. And she said, "Actually, I've decided that it's important to have these conversations early. Can you recommend a book?" And so we were able to have a conversation and everything was resolved, which is wonderful. Like, I loved that conversation. It really felt like a validation of my, what I need to be true, and also sort of the ending of the conflict. But that doesn't mean the conflict at the time wasn't difficult. It was terribly difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be heartbreaking, both for your daughter, who would just not even begin to understand why suddenly her friend wasn't available, and for you, because of the social ramification of between you and that mother, depending on how close you were, and also whether there was a ripple effect out into the other parent community. And I mean, wow, it's such a potential for distancing, for isolation, and it is something that can happen so quickly at the school gates or around them, which brings its own whole barrel of triggers and difficulty when we start to relive our own unhealed stuff from from our school experiences, but how amazing that she was able to kind of, to give you that full circle moment of saying, you know what, actually now I see a value in the way that you were choosing to do things. And now I understand. And can you help me? I mean, that takes a lot of courage from her to come to you and say, yeah, okay, I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And were you having lots of conversations with Alice at that point about her friend, like what was going on? Did she understand, or?
I'm not sure we shielded her a bit from that. Well, I never sort of said, I never pointed out, that conversation you had, I never did that. And I didn't highlight how the friendship had sort of was no longer supported. I mean, I think she had a sense of it, but what I did do and what I continued to do with my younger kids was to start having a really open conversation about not everybody talks about these things. Mm-hmm. And you are really lucky that you are able to get this information when you're younger, because it's going to give you the ability to make good decisions and to care for yourself when you're older. And so we just had to add in the conversation about how we are situated in a culture. And if I had my time again, I would be having that conversation alongside the other conversations. But, we live and learn, and I didn't know that was going to be an important thing. But it's possible. I think sometimes parents can be concerned that they don't want to sort of put some sort of stigma on these conversations about sexuality with their kids. And so they feel loath to say, nobody else talks about this stuff. We have to keep it amongst ourselves. But it doesn't have to be like that. It can be framed as a gift and sort of as a, you're really lucky. You get this. Not everyone is able to talk about this because either they don't think it's important or they don't have the skills because no one has shown them how to do it. And so it needs, above everything, my approach to this sort of thing is always the gentleness and the compassion, because there's no place really for, I don't think there's a place for I am right and you are wrong, and therefore, conflict. Because I sort of see everything, every relationship mirrors, in a sense, an intimate relationship we can have. And I sort of think in intimate relationships, we're not saying, I want this, therefore you have to want it as well. Absolutely not. It's a sort of a negotiation. Mm. So for me, I just see my the stand I take about these conversations means that I come into negotiation with people that don't have that stand. And it's about kindness, compassion, and being able to stay strong for what I believe, but also not in any way trying to put that on other people.
Mm. This is something that came up for me once, because I have always been very factual about, where babies come from. And my girls have asked questions like, so like a penis goes inside a vagina? Ew, doesn't that hurt? Like, isn't it like rubby and sore? Ow, and like they've been taking the thinking, to the, and we have conversations about not every woman loves a man and not every man loves a woman. And there are all kinds of different ways to have intimate relations and to be sexual. And there are some questions around that. And then there are questions around, well, the current stance for one of my littles is, that's disgusting. I don't want to do that. And I'll just adopt. Because she said to me the other day, she said, can you make babies with your clothes on? Because maybe that would work. I was like, I appreciate the thought you're putting into this. Mm-hmm. I'm afraid not really. I mean, you do need some degree of contact. Oh, no, then I'll adopt. and it's been her stance since she's understood that, babies come as a result of sexual intercourse. Mm. But there was a situation with me where a dear friend has a different rhythm with her kids and is having different conversations. So where I have an older child, therefore conversations are happening that the younger one is privy to earlier. In that family's case, the younger one in my family is friends with the older one in their family. And so it's not like the season in the family just isn't the same, right? And realizing, perhaps like you, a little being set a little back on my heels that, oh, okay, not everyone's having these conversations. And I realize my naivete about thinking that everyone would just be having these conversations. Of course, we all have our own baggage and level and type and depth of story, and we have our own timings with those conversations. And for better or for worse, time will be the judge of that more than anything else, right? But yeah, it can be so delicate. It isn't just about educating your children so that they can make smart decisions because they've heard and learned about all of this in a safe space. It's also about knowing which parts of that and when you can take out into the public sphere. When it's like we can talk about it. It's that dichotomy, isn't it, between let's talk about this because it's really important and you can ask me anything and I will answer all of your questions and I will tell you anything you want to know at all. The other day we were talking about hormonal implants, that you put underneath your upper arm to prevent your ovulation from occurring. And they had questions and how does that work? And I don't know why we were talking about it, but we were talking about medical implants in general. And that one came up, and being able to have those conversations in that free way and yet say, and not everyone's mummies and daddies are having these conversations with them. So it's important for us to be respectful of that too, right? Like if you have any questions, you come and talk to me. If it comes up in conversation with your other friends, then you probably know way more than they do anyway. So that's cool. And then you talk about, if they have questions, you can answer them if you feel like it. But let's maybe let other people come to this space when they're ready instead of going to school and be like, oh my God, did you know that?
Yeah.
Because it's tricky, right?
It is difficult. You're right. It's difficult. I just constantly come back to what do I want for my kid in the long term? Mm-hmm. And I want them to feel supported, and I want them to have the information, and I want them to have accurate information so that, if they're in the schoolyard or on the school bus or whatever it is, and the conversation comes up, that they're not sort of shocked by someone else bringing the conversation up, that they know, oh yeah, I know this stuff. So they're not on their back foot. I think I'm pretty hardcore about it, actually, to the point where when it comes down to it, my relationship with my kid is more important perhaps than, well, there's no perhaps.
Than anything.
What doing it. Yeah.
More important than anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's that thing about other people. How many times have I said this on the podcast? Leslie Potter, who was one of my early guests on the podcast, is my parenting coach and has been for 7 years. And she's constantly saying to me, Anne, people will think what they think and feel what they feel anyway. They might as well be thinking what they think and feeling what they feel about the true you, or about what is in alignment for you, instead of some pretense that you put out there in the world. And then, you're being judged and evaluated and related with on that basis. You might as well let it fly, because that's what real life is like. I was just calling up, I had put a question on my Instagram and also on the MamaFuel page on Facebook, asking anyone in the community if they'd have any questions. And one mama came back and asked, she said, I'm fine with talking about the mechanics of it, the biological piece, but how do you talk to your kids about pleasure?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because she's not alone in that. There are a lot of parents that have that same thing. There's something about sexual pleasure, so we can differentiate it, because there are lots of different pleasures that we feel in our body. And they're the pleasure of a beautiful view, or yummy food, or the pleasure of, in the case of kids or adults, jumping on the trampoline. And I sort of when I think or talk about sexual pleasure, I situate it amongst all the other pleasures, particularly if the kids are really young. So if we're talking about penis and vagina intercourse, or, there are lots of different sorts of things we can do, but we'll just take that one. I would say that, that's what happens. Like, the person with the vagina helps the person with the penis put the penis inside because it feels nice. Yeah. And that a lot of the times people do that not to make babies. This is a really important point to make, that people often have sex or intercourse or whatever because it feels nice, because it's fun, because it makes them feel close to the other people. So I sort of generalize the idea of pleasure as in feelings, good feelings. And that certainly works for younger kids. And if you're able to talk about it in that way with younger kids, then the conversation becomes a continuum. So you start it off like that, and then you can slowly develop it. Like maybe they would come back at some point and ask what an orgasm is, and that way then you say the same sort of thing. You know that feeling you have when you put chocolate in your mouth, that really feeling. Well, an orgasm is a bit like that sort of feeling, but it comes from our genitals. And because in the end of the day, it's all like, how do we explain sensation? I mean, poets have tried to explain pleasure and use amazing words, and still maybe sometimes it falls short of the actual experience. So, I mean, the question is wonderful because it hints at something that is complicated. Like, how do we talk about amazing sensation in words?
Okay, so talk about pleasure in the context of things that feel good in your body in other ways, things like having that piece of chocolate, or when you're cold and you come in to like wrap yourself in a really cozy blanket, or, that thrill of excitement you get when you're going somewhere fabulous, or it's kind of a mix of all of those things. So I like that idea that you contextualize it and serve it up in an age-appropriate manner. To take it a step further, though, that's talking about sexual intercourse with another person. But all children reach a stage or a period where they start to discover self-pleasure. So they start to discover masturbation. And there is, I think, an innate sense that this is something between me and my body. And so there is I think, quite an automatic hiding of this, because this is mine, and this is private, and not wanting to show other people this, which is great because it helps keep the kids safe. But how do you talk to kids about masturbation, and how do you encourage? I remember having a conversation once. I was in my early 30s, and I was on a business trip with a woman. I was working in PR at the time, and she was a media trainer. And so she had been a news presenter in the UK. And she said to me as we were going through the airport, we get to Athens, and she says, "Oh, thank God they didn't ask me what my dildo was." And I said, "Sorry?" She said, "Yeah, I always travel with a vibrator." And once it was activated, it went off. And so there was a huge kerfuffle because my vibrator was vibrating in my suitcase. And I just remember looking at her and from the height of my puritanical, and goodness knows I wasn't any kind of a, puritanical being, but I suddenly felt quite prudish and was like, oh goodness. I didn't know what to say to that, because here was this woman that I had met in a professional context and who'd been on national TV and who was just sort of throwing very casually. And she said, "Oh yeah, I gave my daughter her first vibrator when she was 11 because, she's going to get something anyway. I'd rather she use a vibrator than a banana." So, and I just, again, was like, okay, let's see if we can find her taxi, And the conversation continued because she had been traveling with men. And so it became a big, it was just such an eye-opening experience for me. And my husband and I have had conversations like that. So how do we, he grew up in a different era, in a different culture than I did. And he's like, "This is yours." We have 2 girls. I'm happy to support whatever, but you lead this one, because I don't even, grew up very Catholic, very guilt-ridden. And so there's a degree of discomfort for him. But how do you have those conversations about, like, how do you know what to tell your kids and when to stop? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you feel into the boundaries of what? Because in our house, 50% of the population wants to know every single detail about how it all works. And what does it feel like when, what does it mean when I have butterflies in my genitals? And I don't mean physical butterflies for you listening. I mean metaphorical butterflies, right? Like a sensation. What does it mean when I get this kind of bubbly sensation? And what is it? And the other one is like, I don't want to hear it. No, she's more like you were when you were in Nigeria. Like, I don't want to have the conversation. And we'd had lots of conversations about the period. They had seen my blood. We've been really, really open. So that part's totally handled. It's for them more the part about, well, it's okay to want to, find pleasure in your body. And that's something that we do at home. So that let's not do that when we're over at someone's house for a sleepover or, in the living room and some kids start to discover themselves quite young, like when they're 5 and 6, they, rub against the carpet and because it feels good. Yeah, right. It does.
Exactly. And that's an interesting dynamic that you described between your two daughters. Like, it's an opportunity, I think, to practice or demonstrate consensual, behavior as an adult, because you can say to when the conversation is coming up and they're both there and they both have different reactions, you can sort of have an opportunity to listen to both of them and go, okay, I understand you don't want to hear this and your sister does. So how can we meet both your needs? And you sort of create a collaborative experience for them where they can both look at, okay, well, I could just leave the room or you guys can leave the room or work out some way that everyone gets what they need. Because the reality of it is, just like with our sexual self, we are all different in terms of, our interest or tolerance of conversations about sexuality. And I think in the same way that your colleague was able to be very open, not everyone is or even needs to be, for that matter. And I think at the moment our culture is swinging towards everyone should be open about this stuff because, I think that's in response to how we have been not open in the past. But the reality of it is, like, forcing people to be open with conversations with sexuality is just as unpleasant as forcing people not to talk about it, and it all has to be private and secret. So it's sort of a continuum, and we might see that in our children as we see it in ourselves. It's just about supporting kids to learn more about themselves. So some of us are interested in masturbation, and there are other people in the house that don't want to see us doing that. So where can you go to have a private space? I mean, I remember we would talk about masturbation as being something that also can help you sleep or reduce stress. It teaches us more about our body and what feels good for our body, so that if we ever want to share our body with someone else, then we're going into that encounter with a sort of a better understanding of who we are, and that's really good. I remember we were in a car one day and in Melbourne, and we're listening to the radio, and on the radio, it was morning radio, and so it's a little bit smutty. Mm-hmm. The kids are in the car with me, and we're driving somewhere, and the DJ came on, and they were talking about having trouble going to sleep, something, and they were alluding to masturbation or jerking off, but they weren't exactly saying it. But the kids in the car were there, and I was going, oh, they're not actually telling us what they think is good to help us sleep. And one of the kids says, well, I know what they're saying. And I go, oh, what are they saying? He goes, masturbation. And I go, absolutely, yes. And we drove on, So
check, that message got through.
Yeah, good one.
I had never thought about that. That is really interesting, actually. And true. And you kind of figure that out for yourself at some stage, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And I think culture, religion, culture, family story, trauma has so much to answer for, insofar as these conversations can be so much more difficult to have than they would be if all of that baggage wasn't there. If we were You look back at certain cultures where it was very, very, very common for men to have male lovers because they were just all together all the time. And women learned about sexuality with other women and then eventually came perhaps across a man and procreated and then went back to their women. There have been so many different periods in our sexual history as a species. And yet somehow it feels like after a brief loosening of the rigidity around it in maybe the 60s and 70s, that things have gotten, there's been a bit of a pendulum swing in the other direction, and that things have gotten quite rigid and conservative in some ways again, particularly in today's political climate. And I don't really know where I'm going with this comment or
I think it probably depends which country you live in and how old you are, because there are different expectations of different age groups. So for example, 15, 16, 17-year-olds here in Ireland, I think the expectation here would be that they would be out there, exploring their sexual selves and having partners. And I'm not talking about the expectation from their parents, but I'm talking about the expectation of their peers and perhaps the media that they consume, right? So there's a particular culture there that expects a certain sexual behavior. And then maybe people my age in Ireland, well, ideally you should be partnered, preferably married to an opposite sex partner, and be having a relationship that is an ongoing sexual thing, but it would be private. And you wouldn't really talk very much about it. And perhaps, God forbid, that you got divorced, or you were in a relationship that was impacted by infidelity, or those sort of things. So we all have, depending on our age and the culture we live in, and the subcultures, perhaps, we all are having to deal with different pressures in different ways. And what I find very interesting is, for some people, they fit completely into the norms of their expected group. So there are some of us, say people my age, who absolutely love being married. They're very committed. They have a healthy relationship, whatever that means. And it's easy to live in that culture. And there are others of us who it's not easy at all to live in that culture. And there's no fault of anyone's. It's just that there is such a diversity of human experience and human bodies and human desires and human interests that it's just the way it goes, right? So for some of us, it's going to be great because we're going to fit into the mold of whatever group we're in. And for the rest of us, it's going to be really complicated to constantly find out, well, what are the things I personally like rather than what the world tells me I like? What are the behaviors that bring me joy? And how can I sort of maintain my sense of self-respect and self-acceptance in the face of pressure to be something that I'm not?
So this brings us close to the end of our conversation, but I wanted to ask you this because last week at time of recording, I listened to a snippet of a conversation on the French-Swiss radio, excuse me, where they were speaking to a woman who has done her PhD thesis on sexting. And she had done a study on young people from the ages of 16 to 20 and was trying to understand, I'm not sure what her thesis was exactly, but trying to understand how they used social media, what they communicated via social media, and what the impacts could be that we've all thought about and have all started talking about. Maybe not all. Some of us are having conversations with our children about the potential eventual fallouts of having, nude photos or videos. Once they're sent, they're out of your control, and just generally talking about digital safety. And she took the results of this study and they were widely published and widely discussed, but that study was done 3 or 4 years ago at time of recording. And so 2 years later, she decided to do the exact same study, which in academic circles makes no sense because you don't do the exact same study immediately after. You do it later so that you compare, groups, etc., population groups. But she decided to take the same study and apply it to 12 to 15-year-olds. And looking at how that age group was using technology, whether sexting was part of their experience, and it is. So if you have a 12 to a 15-year-old with a phone, the likelihood is that at some stage your child will receive a photo of someone else, topless, bottomless, whatever. And the conversation then went on to, she described that the children, the young people who seemed to think that it was just a fatality, like it was just something, it was just going to happen. Like it was, they just knew that if they had shared any kind of information online, any kind of picture with a partner, if that relationship either never happened because they had sent it in hopes of becoming a boyfriend or a girlfriend, if that relationship never happened, then that picture was going to kind of be fair game and was very likely to be sent out. And also if the relationship ended, that, well, yeah, it happens. So they accepted it as something that was a foregone conclusion rather than something that we as much older humans are, would potentially be horrified by and could be really affected. And those kids between the age of 12 to 15 were also those who were most likely to be judging more harshly if, say, a boy received a naked picture of a girl and then the boy sent the picture around to friends, was the example that was given. And it does not always happen in that direction. It happens absolutely in the other direction and all sorts of other directions as well, boys to boys, girls to girls, etc. That the children in the 12 to 15 age bracket were more likely to harshly judge the girl who had sent the picture in the first place than the boy who disseminated it. So that the victim of this viral scenario was the girl who would have taken the picture in the first place or let herself be photographed, then somehow becomes the person who's in the wrong. It's not the boy who sent it around. And interestingly, they were talking about how in that age group, when they do send things around, which happens all the time, that it's usually to make the rest of the group laugh or to have some sort of a belonging, like a fitting in piece. So I think that there's also conversations, and this is a personal bias. So as you're listening, you may not agree with this. And Sarah, I'd be interested in your take on this. But we've just given our oldest daughter a phone that is more than the embarrassing bright red Nokia we had allowed her to have before. This one has a screen, a big one, and it's an iPhone. It's an old one, but it's an iPhone. And so we have had conversations with her about, it may be that you get something that you don't want to see. Please make sure that you talk to us about it. You'll never get in trouble. It's really important for us to keep you safe and for you to keep you safe. And if you see anything going on, then make sure you talk to a trusted adult, and talking to her about whether she feels safe and is she ready to have this kind of thing. I'd be interested to know how you, and this is maybe broader than your area of focus, but how do you have that sexuality and digital safety conversation with kids at different ages without scaring them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think
it's a really long run up. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, because it's a complicated thing. I actually think it comes back to culture again. And one of the things that I always have in the forefront of my mind is that my kids, most kids of people my age anyway, are growing up as a digital native. And so the world in which they move from their digital device and the way they interact with people is just so different from how I interact in that world. And so from very early on, if we can support them in these, in helping them learn the social rules of those technologies, in a sense, it's almost no different to teaching the social rules of, well, how do you go to a disco in real life? And there are two people there, and it's very much about talking about consent. Now, I'm not sure that it is possible to create fear and panic around digital devices in kids, our age kids, because to them, it is just Aladdin's cave of connection and opportunities to be creative and making TikTok videos that get likes. And I think if we do jump into the conversations with this very much danger, 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 and not acknowledge that there are wonderful things about this sort of way of relating to people, then we are in danger of becoming dinosaurs in our kids' eyes, and they're not going to come to us and talk about it, things that go wrong, because we haven't acknowledged that for the most part, a lot of interactions online are pleasurable. And I mean, there's information in the sex education research that would suggest that digital technology can be a great way to interact with someone sexually, because it's a form of safe sex, because there's no way you're ever going to get an STI or get pregnant by having some sort of cyber intimate interaction. Now, there are other risks to it, but it's interesting to think about it in that other way, because the vast majority of parents they see media reports about all the negative things to do.
Yeah.
Teen sexuality and the digital world, when the reality is that so many younger people, they are well able to manage the space, and they just need the adults around them to believe in their ability and support their ability instead of constantly coming down hard on them. So it hasn't come to my mind at the moment, but there is a technique you can use. It says that you acknowledge with your kid that I know that you know. Excuse me, I'm going to have to cough. I know there are wonderful things about digital communication, and I can see how much you love them. So you're reflecting to your kid of how useful these things are for them, and at the same time, I feel anxious because I'm not as experienced in this world as you are. So I would love your help to understand what is good about this stuff. So you use a collaborative approach to them, and you're asking them to invite you into the world, and show you some of the wonderful things. And so therefore, you're sort of, that ratio about having 4 positive things to 1 negative thing, and how that sort of supports connection and relationship. That if we do that, if we have 4 positive conversations about tech with our kid, and then 1 thing that we're concerned about, and we phrase it as it's coming from us. I feel afraid because I hear these reports of people or young people doing with the face in them or whatever it is, and we couch it from our worry, then it's not like we're pushing something on our kid. We're just coming with our valid concern, and we are open to hear what they have to say about it and what their friends are doing. And the other thing is, instead of asking them what they are doing, say, and how are your friends going? What have you noticed in school about how people are managing their intimate lives on their device? And that way you can open up the conversation without it being a real, like, I'm looking at you, kid, tell me what's going on sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's much easier. It's easier to have those conversations.
That is, I wish we'd had this conversation before we gave our daughter the phone, because there was a degree, we did very much own our concerns and present them as these are our fears, and set up the phone in a way so that in our case, and I even talked about this in a podcast episode, when we decided to give her the phone, when we spoke to Caroline and I had a conversation that was recorded, and we said, these are the things that we want to put in place so that it's a family account, and any app that goes on the phone is only if I approve it. And obviously once the app is on, then I have access to the phone and I can check at any time. That's one of our agreements. But, I'm going to need to trust her and to let her run with it, and so that she comes to me if she needs something. But there was I would say, a probably not always helpful weight to the things that were scaring us, and not enough weight given to, oh my God, this is so exciting. You get to talk to all your friends. And for the most part, the messages that I see flying are like, hi. They're 11, right? So it's like the whole class says hi. And then one person says, where are you? Just generally. And then the whole class, and so my daughter will sit in the back seat on the way to school and she'll be howling. And the other day I said, what's going on? Are you okay? And she said, yeah, listen, I just heard my phone and I have 45 messages. And I'm going, God, I don't want to, can you imagine turning your phone on and having 45 messages? And they were all, and so she started reading them. And that's what she was reading. And at one point I was like, I love that you're sharing that with me. I'm good now. This conversation's, it's all good. It's all fine. We probably don't need to hear the like. But that's that reminder. In fact, can we just stop on that for 1 second before I come to my last question about the ratio of 4 positive interactions to one concerned interaction? Can you maybe walk us through that for anyone who might have not heard of that before?
Sure. And I'm glad you bring it up again, because I'm not sure if it's 4-1. It might actually be 3-1. But it's one of those.
I'm not sure you can go wrong if you make it 4-1. It's only going to be more of a good thing, right?
And I'm remembering it comes from the idea about that you can judge the success of a relationship depending on this ratio. And the research, I think, comes from long-term relationships, but relationships are relationships, and you can apply it to our relationships, parent to child. So it would be something like, so when my kid comes home from school and they didn't do the dishwasher, so we have a roster of jobs in our house, and they didn't do the dishwasher before they left, I would not lead off with, "You didn't do the dishwasher again." I would be a bit, now I'm not perfect at this by any means, and sometimes I do send that text, "You didn't do the dishwasher again!" Exclamation mark, grouchy emoji face. It would be very much ideal to say, "So how was your day? I love to hear you're so happy. Thanks very much for closing the door quietly when you left the house. You forgot the dishwasher." And then one more thing, like, "Thanks for chaining up your bike," or whatever it was when you came in. So it's and it takes practice, because I think we all have our habits of how we talk to our kids and the things we notice. And certainly for me, that whole getting kids to do jobs around the house, and I know this isn't about sexuality, but it's similar sort of thing. So, for example, if I have heard a worrying conversation or radio program, rather than start off with the worrying thing, I will ask my kids, so what are the exciting things that are happening at school? What are the fun stories that came out of the last disco, for example? Or how is everything going? But trying to draw out positive stories, and then to be able to say after that, "I'm so glad to hear those stories, because the radio is saying this negative thing." And I will be very clear and say, I know negative news sells, but it's affecting me, even though I know not everyone will be, dealing with this negativity. So can you tell me some reassuring things about this? Like, for example, was that the Momo app? Do you remember that a few weeks ago from the time of recording? That there was that big, it was an international.
It was huge. It was such a big hoax.
Yeah. And my daughter was the one that said to me, "Mom, that's not a thing. Don't worry about that. It's all," and I was like, really, really, really? It's just amazing how, and the kids, they all talk to each other. And if you are fortunate enough to have your kids in a group of other kids that have their heads screwed on the right way, then as a parent, I find it, if I can just access that, I find it incredibly reassuring. And one of the things is, even though it's hard to make connections with our kids' parents when our kids are older, because certainly in secondary schools, way more difficult to create those connections, I make an effort to do it, because I know for me, it's reassuring for me to talk to the mum who's got my kid in her house, even though she's 15, and just hear that everything's okay. And it's an act of self-care, really, and self-compassion for myself, that I will sort of step out of my comfort zone and be the first one to text and say, "Hi, I'm my daughter's mom. I know you're whatever's mom," and just checking to see what the deal is. And invariably, those parents are always going to come back and go, "Thanks so much for reaching out. I completely get where you're coming from. Everything's good. I'm here, they're here, whatever." So that 4-1 thing, it's important for my relationship with my kids, but it's also important for my relationship with myself, that I seek out positive information and reassurance that I'm not alone in the way that I'm, concerned with my kid, or, giving them the benefit of the doubt, and these of trust where she says, I'm going to my friend's house. And I say, oh, great. Okay, well, just keep me informed about when you're coming home. And then to trust her, but also
to take care of yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Oh, we could take this so many different ways, but thank you very much for the time that you've already dedicated to this conversation. I wonder where you get your MamaFuel.
Yeah. Well, my family of origin, actually, like my mum would say to me, my mum's turning 70 at the end of this year, and she would say to me that it doesn't matter how old your kids are. So I'm in my late 40s now. It doesn't matter how old your kids are. You are still going to be their parent. Mm-hmm. And there's still complexity. And when you see them struggle and, and it's constant, like how far in do you go and how far do you stay back when you're seeing complexity in their lives. And so I have had huge complexity in my life over the last 10 years. And my mum has been the person, I think, that has given me unconditional positive regard. Loved me in spite of, or loved me even though things have been going on. And what I look for in the things that fuel me or support me are an absence of unasked for advice. So I find that in my mum. I found that in my younger sister. She's 9 years younger than me. And I have two very good friends that I know whatever's going on, I can go to them and they will listen without that thing that I just find so hard. If I'm going through something really hard and someone gives me advice, unwanted advice, it takes energy to have to deal with that, doesn't it? So, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm a quality. I need quality support rather than quantity support. So those four people for me are more than enough, really. And I'm a reader and I love to read. So I have like books and books and books of all the fuel I could possibly want. And I'm so grateful. Because not everyone likes to take in information like that. So yeah, MamaFuel it's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, so important and so personal, right? I love asking that question at the end of every conversation because particularly for guests that I know a little bit better than I know you, I always think I know what they're going to say and I get all excited about what they're going to answer, and then it's something different and it's even more interesting and fascinating than the thing I thought they would say. But yes, I'm sort of chuckling. For those of you who are listening, you won't be able to see this, but I'll see if I can lift the pile of my most recent Amazon. You can go onto my Instagram to see the pile of my most recent Amazon purchase. Oh, but I just lifted it into camera view. Oh gosh, that's heavy. And that's a small fraction of the many, many bookshelves and cupboards that when you open thinking you'll find blankets, no, you find more books. Because I share that with you. But Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience and for helping to start what I hope will be many conversations across many dinner tables or across many sofas and between many arms, because it's always lovely to have these conversations when you're having a cuddle and you're feeling that close connection anyway. But thank you. And if people want to find you, where can they find you?
My website is thetalk.ie. It's .ie because I live in Ireland. So you can go there and find me. I have a YouTube channel as well, thetalk.ie, under my name, Sarah Sproule, I think. So that's the space too. I'm also on Instagram, thetalk.ie. So
cool. Well, I will link to all of those places in the show notes. Thank you again. I wish you a gorgeous rest of this day. The sun is blindingly shining here in Geneva. I'm loving it. So I'm going to go outside and I hope that you do the same at some point today.
Thanks, Anne.
Speak soon. Could have talked even longer with Sarah about the topic of talking sex with our kids. Sarah's whole project is called The Talk, which I love because there seems to still be this conversation going on around, have you had the talk with your kids? And I did so long ago that I don't even remember, but it's definitely a topic that comes up in a bit of a cyclical way in our house. And every time gets a little more nuanced and every time gets a little more detailed. So I'm grateful for Sarah's time today and for the thinking that is going to happen as a result of this conversation. I wanted to also remind you that the 7th of May is a hot and exciting day because that is the day that all the magic will begin to invite beautiful new souls into the MamaFuel Sisterhood. If you are one of those souls, definitely keep that date on your calendar. And even more, you can drop me an email at Anne, ANNE, at mamafuel.me. There isn't a sales page up or anything at this point, but you as an inside member of the community are so welcome to email me, and I will tell you everything that I can about the sisterhood, which is a lot because I created it. And we can figure out if it feels like the right fit for you. It is a membership that fills every single member's heart with so much joy and grace and spaciousness and delight, including mine. And it is a circle that we are ready to broaden and welcome your beautiful heart into. So I can't wait to hear from you. And like I said, put 7th of May in your calendar because it's a great day. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll talk to you soon. That's it for this episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. Thanks for listening. There's a lot more conversation, sharing, and real mama talk happening in our private Facebook group. You can join that totally free by going to www.thecenteredmamaproject.com/Facebook, or just go to Facebook and type facebook.com/mamafuel.me, or just search mamafuel.me and you'll find us there. Make sure you say hi when you get in there. If you like this episode, or if you know a mama who could use a little bit of Mama Fuel, I would love for you to share this episode and to rate it and leave a review. That will help us get this episode into more mamas' ears, and for that, I will be eternally grateful. Every comment helps, and it is always such a delight to hear from you. Thanks, and bye for now.